Welcome to Jam Talk, powered by Teach Jam. I am your host, the Instructional Savage. Today we are blessed and favored to be in the presence of Dr. Nadia Lopez, who is going to give us her hot take on teacher burnout, attrition, and we're going to hear from her on how we can influence teacher retention and longevity in this much needed industry. Let's begin. All right, so welcome, Nadia.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So today we're going to talk about teacher burnout, and I want to start with some hard-hitting statistics. But as we know, the numbers don't tell the full story. So I would love to hear your insight based on your experiences in this field.
Okay. Sure.
So the first statistic is from the National Education Association, who reported that last year, 40% of teachers stated that they were considering leaving the sector. Okay, 40%. And if we dive in deeper into New York City, the stats are even more alarming. About 70% of teachers in NYC with 25 years or more of experience are leaving in the next 2 years. About 26% of mid-career teachers are leaving in the next 3 years. And over 29% of new teachers are stating that it's unlikely they will remain in the field in the next 3 years. So based on your experience, what do you think is leading to this mass exodus of teachers in education?
So it really comes down to the lack of empathy and compassion for what teachers are having to go through in the classroom, right? There is such a demand on their time, on their energy, but not understanding what is required to come to classrooms every single day to support young people who are just dealing with a lot. So whether it's the trauma that they experienced during COVID, before COVID, and what they're going through right now, the academic challenges that are happening, the lack of preparation that teachers receive, whether it was from colleges, universities, or whatever teacher preparation that they've gone through. You have leaders who are tired, who cannot be responsive to what's happening in the classrooms. And then there's the parents, right? Like, as much as we love parents and they're the ones who are sharing their gifts with us, they are not actually engaging in the partnership that is required to support their young people. So the onus has been put on our teachers. And what we saw in COVID was like there was this love and there was this praise and finally the recognition that educators needed. But then as soon as it got too long, folks were like, we need the kids back in school. They stopped coming, they stopped supporting. And then the question was like, why aren't kids reading on grade level? What are we doing about these math skills? And so folks are tired and ready to go.
So we're going to unpack a lot of what you just spoke about. I hear you speaking about the causes of burnout, the consequences of burnout, as well as the tension between high expectations for student achievement and then honoring the very lived and real experiences of teachers. All right, let's unpack this concept of teacher burnout a bit further, okay? Psychology Today defines teacher burnout as a state of chronic stress that leads to physical, emotional exhaustion, cynicism, detachment, and feelings of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment. Based on your experience as a teacher and a principal, what are the specific conditions that you have experienced in your work that have led to these feelings of exhaustion and cynicism? Let's go back before the pandemic, because we've been hearing for many years that teachers are exiting the field.
Yes. Off the top, depression and anxiety that came from so many high expectations. So as a teacher, I had expectations that my kids were going to be able to thrive, right? My scholars were going to be exceptional. But there was such a lack of support. So I know that this child is on a 3rd grade level. You want me to have them on a 7th grade level, but you're not actually providing me with the support or just the understanding of what I need to go through. I need to show impact within a year's time. So the depression of I know where they are and there's a demand. The anxiety of I don't want to deal with the leader who's going to say to me, I'm not doing a good job. You start to feel, when you ask what causes that exhaustion, it's you never have time to rest in between. You start to blame yourself. You start to question yourself about whether or not you're doing right by children who already have been experiencing this before they even got into your classroom, right? So there's a burden that's placed on us as educators that no one ever gets to see. And there's nowhere for us to actually dispense it, right? So you don't have a therapist, because half of the times we don't even want to say that we need to go for therapy because we've seen it as a failure, as opposed to, no, you need to deal with the vicarious trauma that you're dealing with some of these children, and then your own triggers, right? Because sometimes we come in with baggage that we didn't even know was actually there in our lives. The other thing is that there are so many policies that's being put into place that they're ever changing by individuals who are not in the classrooms. So when you go in with the expectation of, this is what I'm supposed to do, these are my responsibilities, but then within 2 years, something else changes. Curriculum changes, standards change, and then the needs of the children are constantly consistent, but there's no funding, right? That's the other thing. Poverty is real. And these children are coming in with lack of support from their families. They're coming in hungry. They're coming in abused. And so you're one person having to deal with 30 children every single day for 180 days. You get tired. And that burnout, you start to internalize it. So we're not going to take care of ourselves, right? We don't go and work out. We don't do yoga. We don't walk outside. We don't get fresh air. We don't get sunlight. We ourselves start to internalize, and it affects us in a way that it is affecting our organs. People are having high blood pressure. They're dealing with diabetes because we're working in poor neighborhoods and eating the types of foods that are not good for us, and we're not getting sleep. So we're sleep deprived. We're trying to make decisions every single day. And so that burnout that we don't even recognize is happening to us, and they don't even tell us, right? Because to say teachers are going through burnout would mean somebody has to be accountable. The powers that be don't want to be accountable. So we keep doing it. Why? Because we've been taught that. Why? Because our parents did it too. It's work ethic, but we're slowly killing ourselves.
Yeah. I have a controversial question to ask you.
Sure.
Okay? Because you spoke about it not being dubbed burnout because that means someone has to account for the causes behind the burnout and possibly figure out ways to eliminate those causes within their school or district system.
Yeah.
Do you think that the role of a teacher, do you think that these conditions and factors come with the role of being a teacher?
It doesn't have to.
Can you talk more about that?
So I'm going to speak specifically from the school that I was leading, right? I understood that dealing with children, specifically in Brownsville, meant that my staff was going to be dealing with vicarious trauma. Children are coming in with behaviors that they learned at home, right? And it's a beast. There are no textbooks that prepare you for that. If you've never gone through it yourself, it's hard. And if you did go through it, it's triggering. So part of my number one priority was to provide mental health services for my staff, right? And when I did that, I was penalized by the Department of Education. They literally took $225,000 from my budget because I prioritized mental health for my staff and for the children. And they said that I was misappropriating funds. I did not prioritize academics. I said we can't get to academics if my staff isn't well and the children aren't well, right? At the end of the day, I refused to compromise that because I knew, just as a teacher, what it was going to be required for them to show up and to do this job. Because children know how to push buttons of adults. And in their minds, they've seen fighting all the time. So it's normalized. We fight, we make up. A teacher fights, a teacher yells, a teacher grabs you. It's corporate punishment. That is the loss of their license. That is the loss of their ability to take care of their own household. So I wanted to protect them, right? So in understanding that, I wholeheartedly had to challenge a system that said we need to put children first, but weren't willing to put the adults first. And by doing that, what I was doing was setting precedents, because then it said that it was saying to the system, you need to take care of your people. But are they willing to say, we need to make sure we're taking care of our people? Even to this day, there are no mental health services that are prioritized for adults. Not in New York City public schools. it is prioritized for the children. We talk about SEL, we talk about crisis intervention, but where's the intervention for our adults, right? And so if we took time to focus on the individuals who are in our classrooms, then we could eliminate some of the burnout. I provided yoga. I brought a nutritionist in because we're eating foods out of season that's affecting our health. There's so many people who are dealing with diabetes and high blood pressure because of the stress of the work. I would literally take over classes and send my staff home and not charge them for a day because I started to see and hear their voices are going up. They're at their breaking point. They're frustrated. Some of the things aren't related to classroom. It could be something at home, right? Before we even got onto this conversation, I told you about what I'm dealing with my parents.
Right.
If you have things happening at home and then you have these demands when you're walking into this building and you're just trying to get through the day and you keep having your buttons pushed, you get to a breaking point and you lash out on the kids. I could not have that happening. So what does it look like for us to be not just culturally responsive, but to be in a place of humanity, to see you as a human being, to stop you and say, Savage, are you okay?
Yeah.
What do you need? And to also say that I'm going to cover you, because as a leader, I'm no longer in a position of saying I can't be a teacher. That's where I started, right? So we can actually disrupt the burnout that's happening, but it's a decision that people are waiting for a policy to come in place and money to be put into action before we do something. We just need to treat each other like human beings and do what's right.
As you were speaking, an interesting thing is I also taught in Brownsville. I taught at a transfer school called Rhodes for court-involved youth. And I think I was 22 at the time. It was my first job. And I was commuting in from New Jersey. I was commuting in first from Newark and then Harrison in New Jersey. And I remember in my third year, I decided to resign. And I remember having a lot of shame around my resignation because I felt like it was, I guess the word, I felt like it was indicative of me not being able to keep up. And it took some time to unpack why I chose to resign. And I realized that despite the high achievement that I was fostering with my students in math, I felt like I couldn't compete with the environment. My resignation actually came at the heel of a student who had been a victim of gun violence. And that student, we had been getting ready for the Regents. He had graduated in June, and the August before the next school year started, he got shot and he was in a coma. And I just thought to myself, like, I can get high test scores. I can make sure I'm planned. I had 3 courses I was teaching. I can make sure I have 15 lesson plans a day. My grade book is kept up. I'm doing the after school program. I was doing youth court, which is a restorative program. Could do after school, all of these things, but I can't compete with gun violence. I can't compete with institutional racism, structures in the neighborhood, being in a food desert. I think there were just 2 options of where I could eat. It was Fine Fare and it was Golden Crust.
I was going to say Golden Crust.
Yeah,
Yep.
That was it. That was it.
Yeah.
And it was exhausting. But I felt a lot of shame walking away from that. And now thinking back, you know, what do you think the administrators at my school could have done to help me understand that there were always going to be these mitigating circumstances that needed to be considered in terms of what the kids were bringing from home, the lives that they were going back to after school, and then the tension of high test scores, high achievement, and always being in this intersectionality of criticality and hope, right? I needed to be hopeful regardless of what I thought they were coming into school with. What could my administrators have done to help me remain in that?
I'm going to ask you a question before I answer that. How did your administrators show up?
I think they showed up empathetic, but they showed up also with, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, that type of attitude.
So And the reason why I ask that is not a judgment on them. When I took on the role of becoming a Brownsville principal, although I was from Brooklyn, I wasn't from Brownsville. There's a different energy and culture in Crown Heights, Fort Greene, and Bed-Stuy. It's different, right? Brownsville is the belly of the beast. Yeah. I literally had to immerse myself in Brownsville. That meant I was in the projects. That meant I was at the block parties. That meant I was at every event. Anything that was Brownsville-esque, I was there. I was at the Bargain Hunters. I was on Pickens Avenue. I was on Mother Gaston. I was every single where, right? And so I had a different lens on how to present it to my team. And the empathy I had and the compassion was understanding the children, but also understanding my staff, right? So I walked the walk and talked the talk. I took my staff out on a community walk. It was part of the culture that we had to actually go out into the neighborhood. So we didn't have class. We would go to the projects. We would go on Pickens Avenue. We would go to the library. We would go to all the different places for them to really be able to see what the children were going through, and then what the teachers had to go against every single day in terms of mindset, right? Because sometimes you walk in and it's just like, why don't they get it? I'm really trying. They're not doing this. They're not doing that. Then there's also the teacher who feels like I'm doing every single thing possible, and I only feel like the only way I can be successful is I have to leave because it's not getting to them, right? If I don't show you what's standing in the way of you getting to them, you won't understand what you need differently. And I can't create a plan of action in relation to where you're at. We got to work in partnership. That's why I put the mental health in place. That's why I would create days just for my staff. The massages were great. Bringing in the nutritionist was great. But what about just having days where we didn't have the kids in and the teachers just could unpack what they were experiencing? What does it look like to have the scholars who graduated to come back and talk about the impact? Because we never hear as educators what this really means in the long term, right? And then here was the other thing that is unconventional. I don't want you to stay here forever. I want you to know that when the time comes and it's time for you to leave, there's no personal hard feelings against that. I need you to feel successful. What I need from you as an educator is to plant seeds. While you're here, do all that you can every single day. But the minute you feel like this is too much, I'm okay with that, because this place will break you. I never wanted an educator to feel obligated to stay beyond their time, because we've been taught as a people, right, to endure. We've been taught, especially as Black women, to keep wearing the cape and to hold on. And if we don't do this, then somehow we're failing. But we tell children to graduate. So why are we staying in the same place? It becomes an oxymoron. So I would tell my team, Mott Hall Bridges Academy is a stepping stone. I want you to learn all that you can. I want you to be the very best. I would then bring in other teachers to come in and cultivate them so that they can learn and they can understand the culture, and then they could take over those positions. Because at the end of the day, we are putting so much pressure on adults to be saviors. And that's part of the problem. Somewhere along the line, we are literally putting our lives on the line, mentally, physically, and emotionally. And then we're no good, especially to the family members that are waiting for us, right? So you shouldn't have walked away feeling like you're failing children. You should have never walked away feeling like somehow if I leave here, this generation of children from here and next year, I'm not going to be well. We plant the seeds so that they can take care of the generation to come. You understand? Because if not, then what's the point of you being a teacher, right? And I've come too close to death. Like, as much as I was empowering my team, no one was doing that for me. So I take it really serious for educators to understand your mental health is priority. Your physical health is priority. If you're in a place where you're being guilted into staying, that's not the place for you. Because it's actually creating more harm for you, because you're teaching children to endure abuse. You're teaching children to endure having to settle. And that's not what we want for them. So I would literally say, as administrators, we have an obligation to understand the landscape of what's going on, but to also empower our team to know that it's okay to move on.
I want to explore a couple of things. So you spoke about the long-term impact in terms of, we'll go into that long-term impact. You also spoke about kind of looking at teaching or viewing teachers, particularly in really high stress environments, this concept of service. Maybe you do 3 to 5 years of service, you do it really well, and then you go elsewhere and you take your talents and strengths and apply them as applicable. Let's talk about first this long-term impact. I want to read a couple of stats for you in terms of what teacher burnout does to kids.
Yes.
Teacher burnout and attrition go hand in hand. According to NEA, National Education Association, the loss of a teacher during the school year is like losing up to 72 instructional days, almost half of the school year. This experience causes students to fall behind and significantly disrupts learning. It doesn't just impact the students who lose the teacher that year, it impacts everyone in the school community, because then teachers are being asked to take on other roles, even if they're not directly teaching those students in that content area. Maybe they're hearing from those students the experience that they're going through, the dissatisfaction of the whole situation. So with that in mind, when you have a teacher who's losing their cool in front of students and you make the executive decision as the principal to step in and have that teacher go home for the day, right? How do you balance being empathetic and saying, I see you as a human, right? And I want to help you in this moment where maybe there is a lapse of response or a lapse of judgment, right? But I know if you walk away today, perhaps we don't have a teacher for the rest of the year, and this is what it's going to mean in terms of student learning. But I also know if you don't walk away and you continue on this path, right, I'm not holding you to the expectations when it comes to respect and dignity for students, as well as balancing the academic expectations that we have. Like, how do you decide how to approach teachers in positions like that?
I'm a mom. I don't want anybody in front of my daughters that's going to hurt her, right? So every single one of those children who have been in the school, that's my child. And that's how I see it. So I look at it as, I'm a mom first. I want my child to be safe. I'm also a human being, and I don't want anyone to lose their job.
But what if they have to? What if they have to?
What do you mean?
Your pool.
Yeah. I mean, I've had the scenarios, right? I've had the scenario where there was the one person who, they were the ones who knew everything about every child and would come to me all the time about this child, this child, this child, right? I had a scholar who came in on a Thursday and was talking to me in the hallway and said, I overheard my sister and my father talking about my mother's dying. We were in the hallway, it was lunchtime, and there were kids going down the stairs, and there was a couple of kids just, like trailing along, but they were going down the stairs. And the teacher came out and she started yelling. And I'm standing there, and I looked at her and I was like, I'm right here. It's like, they're okay, they're walking down the stairs. And she was like, no, because they should be downstairs. I said, and I'm still standing here, and they need to go, they're gonna go downstairs. So she went back into her office, her room. The next day, it was 8 in the morning. The scholar came in, his mother had died 5 in the morning. And he was in the school 8 in the morning at the conference table, and I'm talking to him. And the teacher walked in and was like, he got tears in his eyes, I have tears in my eyes, and she had no emotional intelligence in that moment. And I looked at her and I said, I need you to step out. Because you're not paying attention to anything, right? After that, I went and I spoke to her and I said, you can't stay here. You got to go home. But you cannot stay here. I ended up having to force her to take a medical leave, because whatever was happening had gone so far beyond her ability to understand that she was literally causing trauma to a child, right? So she had to leave. I had another scenario where there was someone who, I don't know, snapped in a classroom and threw a water bottle. The kids ran into my office, and it was the boys. The girls ain't moved. They were like, I wish she would, right? The boys were like, I'm not staying in the room with her. I said, what happened? They explained to me. That person had to be, unfortunately, brought up on corporal punishment, right? Because you physically grab something, right? And ultimately, because they didn't want to go through the process, decided that they were going to leave the system. They would have been found guilty because of their action, and there was nothing that I could do. And I had been supporting this person, but again, there was just so much that they were dealing with that they weren't being open and they didn't want to receive any support, that ended up causing them their livelihood to ever work in the Department of Education. Either way, in both scenarios, I had to center the child, right? And I was open and honest in having conversations with them about why I had to make the executive decision I was making, right? And I can't sit here and sugarcoat it for them. I can't protect them, because protecting them would mean that I somehow don't know how to have clarity around making executive decisions. Right. And so it is the reason why I try my very best to create the culture in which everyone knows that anything that I'm doing is always in the best interest of the adults and the children. In the second scenario, where the children, the person had to be, they left, I ended up having to take over the class, right? That's a lot for an administrator to do when you're trying to run a school. But I needed the consistency, because as you share with the stats, if I don't do this, the implications of one getting a sub in there, the kids are going to run amok, right? They're not going to know anything. If I try to get someone new in there and they're not acclimated to our curriculum, it's like a reset. So I'm going to have them lose so much instruction that I can't afford that. So I had to make the executive decision. And at that time, I didn't have an AP. I literally had to teach all day and then in the evening get to my work, right? But those are the sacrifices. And unfortunately, people outside of education don't know what we have to endure, right? And it happens often. And so there's no easy fix. It's a case by case. It's what you have to do in your own building. I don't have a strategic plan that I can say, here, this is what's going to work. You have to know your school. You have to know your community. You have to know your capacity. And I'm going to be honest, Savage, the sacrifices I made ultimately did harm me, because I was taking on so much. But sometimes in my thought process was, I'd rather sacrifice myself than sacrifice a class of 75 children, right? Like a grade level. Sometimes we look at it, and that's why I say, like, the savioristic complex that we go through is like, I will sacrifice me in this process just so that this group of children don't have a lapse, because I know all that we worked on, it takes only a month to unravel what it takes 3 years to build.
Right, right. As you were speaking, I thought of a situation. At one point, I had a 7th grade teacher, and the students were giving her a hard time, but her response to them also was quite provocative and inflammatory. She took small issues and made them big, and they knew that they could get a rise out of her. And it was mostly like horseplaying, talking, never anything like outright disrespect, but there was defiance. And I remember one time she called me to the room and she said, I'm not teaching. I'm not teaching at all. And I said, that's okay, I will. And I walked in and I started teaching them. Later on in the conversation, I learned from her that she felt that in the moment, me going in and deciding to teach in her stead was not the way that she wanted. It was offensive. It's not the way she wanted to be supported, because she wanted to show me that they couldn't be taught. She wanted to show me that they were animals that couldn't be corralled, and me going in kind of challenged her narrative. So I ask myself sometimes, when is it no longer our responsibility to support the adult in the situation? When do we say enough is enough? Like, respectfully, my charge is to make sure these kids learn and that they read and that they're able to do math at the end of the year. And I'm in District 12, where we often have single digit numbers in terms of achievement. And we're talking about life expectancy. We're talking about earning, future earning. We're talking about, and future earning correlates to access to healthcare. We're talking about so many generational implications. So when do I stop hearing the stories of the adults and the reasons why they had a lapse in response or a lapse in judgment and say, but my job is to do X, Y, and Z?
I've always had non-negotiables. I've always had non-negotiables. You know who I am when you stepped into this room. And it was put into place from the hiring process. So one of the things I made sure I did, I never hired on my own. I hired with a team that consisted of director of programs, that consisted of teachers. When I got an assistant principal, that they were all part of the hiring practice, as well as the scholars, right? Because I needed the message to be consistent about what my expectations are, right? When they ask questions about the job, about me, I want those people who work for me and work with me to answer the question. I'm all about the children. I'm all about supporting adults, but I do not tolerate disrespect. I do not tolerate low expectations of them where you start to say, well, it's them, it's not me, it's not.
Lack of accountability, ownership.
You can't stay past that year. Like, I'm very, very clear. No one in my building, if they even came across speaking that way, you can't stay here past that year, because it doesn't make sense. This is not the right place for you. Why would you want to stay somewhere where you don't even feel like the children are going to amount to anything? Go somewhere else, right? Like, you have the talents and capabilities. You have choice. Make the decision, because if not, I'm going to help you make the decision. You can't stay here. And I think that what's important for leaders is that you also have to show up, right? Because you were present and you said, you know what, that's fine, I'll take over. That person in their mind felt like, you can't survive without me. How dare you? You here because I just need a teacher, and I can't do your job as well as do my job, but we'll be fine.
Nadia, there have only been 2 years as an administrator that I have not taught for at least 3 months of the year.
Do you understand?
Because it has to get done.
And that becomes a threat to them. I've had that teacher too where, oh, you're going to be out for how long? Oh, no problem. I'll take over. Because here's the thing. You're not bigger than me.
Right.
And I'm not bigger than this.
Right. Like, that's why I'm here. I have this license. I opened up this school because I am who I am. You can't get it together, that's not my problem. There's a whole bunch of other schools in this city, and if you would like to open your very own, I've printed out the new school application.
Folks.
But please don't ask me to be on your team, because I'm not going to be. Like, you also have to have that caveat.
Yeah.
You have to just be consistent and stand your ground when it comes to your expectations in terms of the non-negotiable. I'm clear on my convictions. Everyone was clear. You can't stay here with that, right? Yeah. And if I got to take over, and the kids knew, if I'm taking over, we're about to learn some stuff. I'm not afraid to be in the classroom. I actually like being in the classroom rather than doing this job all day of answering emails and answering to these politicians or answering to the community. If I could be in the classroom every day, I would. But it's a lot.
Right.
So
we choose our hard. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, I have a couple more questions. Okay, I do want to get to the Black educator experience, but we're going to look at the consequences of burnout, the causes, the signs, and the prevention. And I would love for you to rank in terms of the most influential or most impactful. Okay, so here are the 3 consequences: exhaustion, cynicism, and efficacy. Which of these do you think are most detrimental?
Cynicism,
Inefficacy, or exhaustion?
For the person to have?
Yes.
Damn, they're all 3.
You gotta rank.
All 3.
Rank the most. Rank them for me. Most detrimental to least detrimental.
Exhaustion is first. Cynicism would be third.
Okay.
Exhaustion, efficacy, and then cynicism.
Tell us a little bit about your ranking order.
So because I've gone through it, I can definitely speak to why. Exhaustion, when you get to a place of exhaustion, you are there. I can't even explain to you just how you've gotten to a place that you cause damage to your heart, your mind, and your body. And it's damage that could be irreparable because you haven't given yourself enough rest. So now I deal with kidney disease as a result of being so exhausted, knowing I'm tired, but until I had to take a medical leave, I didn't realize how exhausted I was. Efficacy is when you lack that, you don't have belief, right? And so that just automatically creates cynicism. That's why I put that last. And so you need to have the efficacy in believing in yourself, believing in the children, and believing that this is possible. And then cynicism is once you get to that point, you just don't even want to be there, right? I think that's harmful because your attitude and affect not only affects you, it affects the kids, it affects your team. But in ranking them, that's just the order that, from my experience, that I would share.
So, all right, let's go into causes. I read from I think it's like the fund or the New York City Council. Some teachers were stating they were dissatisfied with salary and benefits, school safety and discipline, class size, availability of materials. But overall, all of this was categorized as either poor funding, high emotional demand, or inadequate preparation. Which of these causes do you think are most closely related to teacher burnout?
Oh, lack of preparation, right? Like, yeah, the money is always an issue, but you know what? Teachers have been teaching for a very long time and not getting the funding, and not that it makes it any better, but when you don't have the support and you're doing this work, you literally blame yourself. That causes the anxiety, the depression, the exhaustion, all of the things that is just overall harmful. And so we can teach teachers how to make money, right? Like Teach Jam is doing that type of work, multiple streams of income. They can find things online. But if you're not prepared for what's in that classroom and what you have to deal with in that community, it's a lost cause.
Yep, I agree. All right, signs. You've spoken about the signs that you saw in terms of your own burnout as an administrator. These are signs that are cited: self-doubt, withdrawal, loss of inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
Which of these do you look out, or were you on the lookout for the most when you were supporting your teachers?
Yes. Loss of inspiration was the top. Because then the negative talk comes in, then the self-doubt comes in. I just feel like the one thing that gets us to wanting to be teachers is that we feel like it's a calling, so we're inspired to do that work. If you lose that, then you don't believe that this is what you're supposed to do, so then that's where the self-doubt comes in. And so I would always tell the teachers, like I told you before, if you feel like you're no longer inspired to do this, then don't do it anymore. Because then you start to blame the children for something that you're no longer passionate. And it could just be the place, right? The school is no longer giving you what you need. It could be that the profession is just not adding value. And it could be that you just need time, right? Because sometimes we get into professions without having something else to do, especially if you weren't a career changer and you come into this, you need to experience something else, be inspired and come back, or then maybe go into another industry.
Lastly, prevention. Which of these preventative measures do you think would be most influential in teacher retention? Teacher autonomy, inclusion in conversations about challenges, learning about coping skills, being given choice when it comes to self-care.
It's hard. I think they have to all be exist at the same time, right? Like teachers need to have autonomy because we need to make them feel like we trust them. I think teachers need to make sure of their self-care because that's the most important thing for their well-being. I think that it's also important that it was the other whatever the other two things that you said, inclusion, right? Like to be involved in conversations and to be included in decisions that are being made. Like that's how we build capacity. So we have to do all of them at the same time.
Thank you, Nadia. Okay. I'm excited to get to this last bit, okay? Because we are both Black educators.
Yes.
And being women in education, there's some intersectionality there, but I want to speak specifically about the Black experience, okay? I read an article on Edutopia that shared that Black teachers are leaving the profession at higher rates than non-Black teachers. And to provide a background on the demographic, I was a Black math teacher. There are only 6% of public school secondary math teachers that are Black, and overall, less than 1% of all public school teachers are Black math teachers. A survey of 325 Black math teachers found that, along with feelings of demoralization that many teachers experience, they also cited factors such as microaggressions that are influential in their flight from the profession of teaching. As a Black educator, what are some challenges that you believe our demographic uniquely faces as it relates to burnout?
You know, the microaggression is the largest one. I also believe that, unfortunately, what ends up happening is that you're not treated as an expert in your field. When we are Black in this profession, we are seen as disciplinarians. We are treated as though we have to be the mammies of the show and the pappies of the show. Yeah, that's why I'm like, I'm not the babysitter. We are not seen as valuable assets. We're not considered important enough to include or to be asked our thoughts and opinion about what is in the best interest of children, right? They want us to follow and conform as opposed to actually being considered experts. And so the passive aggressiveness that we experience, the not being given opportunities for additional professional development. You know, we see other people going to PDs and traveling and we don't get to go anywhere. The lack of opportunities to engage in critical friends. Like we get in and it's just like, just make sure that the kids are learning, right? But we're not actually invested in. And it happens a lot. And so we see our counterparts getting promotions that they're not qualified for. We see people with less experience being the ones now telling us what to do. And because we know our children and how they learn, anything that doesn't go aligned to whatever they have subscribed to is considered insubordinate, right? And so, yeah, people are leaving and don't want to do this anymore because you don't respect me.
Yeah.
And so we're teaching children and being treated as though we're not actually fundamentally intelligent human beings. And that's harmful and hurtful as well.
Thank you so much for that insight. So that concludes our conversation on teacher burnout and ways that we can support retention of teachers in this field. Thank you so much, Dr. Lopez. Thank you for joining Jam Talk, sponsored by Teach Jam. But because this was your hot take on this controversial topic, I want you to have the last word. What is one thing that you want all educators, teachers, leaders, support staff to do for themselves in order to have a long-lasting, impactful career?
I'll leave it at this. You have to choose you. Because at the end of the day, no one else will do it. And if you want to live and be there for your family and just be the very best for yourself, you have to choose you. And don't feel guilty about it.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez. Here's to choosing you.